gentlemen, how are we all? I know we are here standing between you and lunch, so we're going to try and make this session a little bit more interactive. And I'm going to share a little bit of a theme that's been running through the last session. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Saudi Arabia. Tarabot is an investor in Saudi Arabia. We focus on transportation, logistics, infrastructure and airports and aviation, and have been in existence now for over 12 years. And we're part of a larger group that includes many other disciplines. We're very, very excited about the prospects in Saudi Arabia. I'm going to start developing this as a theme, and then my colleague Al will then talk a little bit about the nature of how the operator and the investor can work together. I think we've got a general understanding. The aviation market is dynamic, it's exciting, it's growing at a rate that makes us all very keen to be participants into this vast and dynamic industry. And the Middle East is no exception. I think this is repeating on a theme that we've seen all morning in relation to why we're here. We're here because we believe in this infrastructure, we believe in the sector, and we want to see how we can help our government agencies and our partners invest and bring these assets to life. But Saudi has a challenge. Saudi is too oil dependent. It makes up of over 40% of its GDP and over 80% of its net revenues. So it needs to diversify away from being too dependent upon one sector. And all sectors are looking for different kinds of partnership models to be able to identify how they can invest and develop infrastructure that's not necessarily dependent upon the government to the extent it has been in the past. Airports, of course, are key parts of the logistics infrastructure for Saudi. And there are a number of reasons why Saudi Arabia wants to focus on the infrastructure development with public sector participation. The reasons for that is that there's very large budgetary outlays in terms of capital expenditure. There are also a number of competing demands for that capital, both at government level and in domestic areas. And I think ultimately it needs to develop capacity, it needs to bring competition, it needs to bring prices down, and it needs to ensure that we get a better productive model for operating our infrastructure. Airports, of course, is just one case example. We have a number of airports in Saudi Arabia, 28, with some new ones being planned as well, some further greenfield opportunities. Not all of them, of course, will make good case studies or models for private sector participation. The smaller airports invariably are more for the benefit of the local infrastructure. However, there are some great examples, and Hull and Dublin Airport have made great strides in the development of Terminal 5, and the operational excellence is for all to see. So I think a good case study for where the partner, the investor, someone like myself, a good contractor, an operator can work very closely together to develop an asset. And Saudi, of course, a bit like this heart of the Middle East. You know, we sit in a very keen environment for those that want to travel east to west. Transit was not necessarily a key business model in Saudi Arabia, mostly O&D traffic. And of course, you know, serving the religious and Muslim population for pilgrimage. However, my friends at the airline tell me that their transit growth numbers now are growing faster than any other part of their business. And the Jeddah airport, which you'll hopefully all participate in enjoying very soon in its completion as it moves to international operations later this year, is absolutely critical to bring a transit hub, another transit hub into the Middle East. And we, as Tarabot, we invest in Saudi Cargo, and we are spending 1.5 billion on the infrastructure for the cargo developments to support that transit hub. But why are airports good case studies for PPP? I think we've covered these, from various presentations this morning, so I'll just pick up on one or two. Ultimately, they're nice, resilient, long-term growth assets that, as we've seen, grow generally with economic trends and with economic uplift, GDP effectively of the country, which makes it very attractive for long-term investment vehicles like ourselves. And also there's great opportunity in the sector to diversify revenues away from just being purely aeronautically based. And for those of us that are operators in the room, increasingly 20, 30, 40% of our revenues now are coming from sectors, coming from revenue streams that have actually nothing to do with the metal that we pass through the airports. So there's a number of things we consider. I'm not going to dwell on these independently because I think we've covered these in other presentations this morning. But I think one of the critical things is we need to understand what the operating model is, what the government contracting agency, obviously I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, but this is applicable across other countries, what does it need to achieve in terms of the long-term development? What are the key critical activities? Is it around quality of service? Is it around building capability? Is it about diversifying our own budgetary constraints? And how does that then capture into a concession agreement or a management agreement that as an investors we can participate in? And as we've seen through Jacques' presentation, there are a number of key pillars that we have to consider when we're looking at the business case. How much are we going to spend in CapEx? What's it going to cost to run the airport? What are the various elements of financing? Where am I going to get that financing from? How much is it going to cost me? What's the period and term of the financing? We pull that all together and then we look at our business model and our plan and to see whether actually it's going to be financially viable. Is the project bankable? But unfortunately, bankability sometimes comes at a cost. And there's one, I suppose, watchword in this, is that projects take some time to come to fruition. From the day that the government agency first determines this asset is going to be privatised in some form, all the way through to when the projects are selected, when the bids are evaluated, when the financing is in place, and when the contracts are closed, it can take sometimes as much as 2 years. It's a long process with a lot of investment. Investors have to be very committed, and it costs us money. You know, the design, the elements of design, the operating models, bringing the CapEx plans together, it doesn't come for free. So investors have to be absolutely committed and know that there's going to be a transparent chance of success. I don't want to leave the story of Saudi Arabia without talking about a favourite topic of mine as an investor in Saudi cargo. I want to just talk about cargo and logistics. It's somewhat a bit of an underinvested sector. I think it's becoming increasingly more prominent. I spend quite a bit of time talking to the likes of Amazon, and Jollycheck, and Alibaba, and the list goes on. And what do they want? They want on-airport and off-airport infrastructure. They don't want to invest in Saudi Arabia, but with 35 million people, they've got to invest. The consumerization and the growth of e-commerce is phenomenal. It's touching us all. And we sit in a part of the world that is absolutely critical for their success. So how do we, as investors, make it happen for them? Well, we can build infrastructure, we can build warehouses, we can invest in the supporting machinery to facilitate that e-commerce product. And what you may see in the next couple of days is the launch of a very significant program in Saudi Arabia of infrastructure investment in all sectors, energy, mining, but at the heart of it is logistics. We're very fortunate to be already in that sector. We see the competition, we see the benefit of bringing other parties into the logistics sector, and it's definitely an investment class in its own right, and I would certainly commend anybody to think about cargo and logistics as an investable asset in the aviation sector. So I'm just going to leave 3 things, and then we're going to open it up for questions after Al's had his presentation. And there's 3 things for me that I think about and want to leave you with. Is first of all, the structure of the program, the structure of the opportunity has to be bankable. If I can't get it financed and I can't do it at reasonable rates, to be honest with you, the asset's not right for that particular model of private sector participation. The second thing is partnership choice. You know, when we bring the operators and the concessionaires and the grant and the government together along with an investor, we're together for a very long time. We're sometimes married for over 30 years. So that partnership has to be absolutely critical. The choice and the selection and the understanding of the motivations of each of the parties have to be very well understood. And we spend a lot of time talking to partners about how we can help them become successful in Saudi Arabia and what their long-term strategic goals are. And the third thing is the government has to have a strong capability internally. Unfortunately, governments rush to try and get projects into private sector participation, not just airports, others as well, without really understanding what partnership means on their behalf. They've got to have a strong understanding of what it means to stand in the shoes of an investor and be able to support them, especially with many, many stakeholders that we have to deal with. And ultimately, investors have a choice. We can place our money in this sector, or we can go somewhere else. And it's not about a limited pool of activity that's just sitting waiting for you to release your project. No, we're continually looking at projects in other sectors, in other forms of opportunity. And the other thing I would say is cash is king. IRRs are measured in decades. If I don't get cash out of the project, I can't pay the wages. I can't do the light and heavy maintenance. And therefore the bankability of the project and the absorption of its equity and its debt obligations are critical in terms of cash generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lee. Calling our next speaker is an Executive Director, Strategy, Products and Sales, Aviation, Egis Group, including for the airport operations business, which currently operates 17 international airports. He is based in the Middle East, and in addition to his corporate role, he remains an active consultant supporting Egis clients in developing and implementing business and operational strategy. He's been in the aviation industry for more than 25 years. Welcome, Mr. Alan Corner.
Wow, 25 years. We've been talking about long marriages. It's also my 25th wedding anniversary this year. So imagine that, think back to when you got married and all those years and the ups and downs and what it's like to be a partner in a consortium running an airport anywhere in the world. Okay, so I come from the same company as Jacques Coriati, who was already presented in the last session, the Egis Group. And as was just mentioned, ultimately we're a consultancy and engineering company in aviation and other sectors. But one of our key operations areas is in airports, and we operate 18 airports globally mainly under the concession model. And Colin was just talking about the different roles, and building on Jack's discussion earlier on about the operator, the constructor, and the investor. Actually, we can take on, and do routinely take on, more than one of those roles. So, skin in the game was mentioned by somebody, or more than one person today. In all of our projects, or all of our concessions, we're also investing our own equity as well. So we have skin in the game, and like most of the speakers before me, I think that makes a real difference. And it's sort of being the operator and an investor. And our investment can be anywhere between 5 and 100%. Actually, it very much depends on the deal that's presented. And balances out, and Jack explained how we get our money back, and typically, as well as dividends, etc., through technical service agreements as the designer, the engineer to the project. So 5 people were asking this morning, what's the breakdown of the consortium? How do you get your revenues, etc.? Well, absolutely, every deal is different. Every airport is different. We operate on several continents, and so there are many different factors to consider. And that's ultimately what drives our decision about how much investment we're going to make as an operator. This session's it's called, I think, Investor Perspectives on Airport Development. Most of the things, we've covered a lot already today, so to avoid any sort of duplication, I'm just going to take it from a slightly different perspective, just being a bit dynamic in thinking here. So, as an operator and investor, how does that affect my decision making during the running of the airport? And it sort of builds on Colin's sort of the DAA perspective, if you like. This is the sort of Egis perspective, and we operate slightly different airports, from as small as about 500,000 pax to more than 10 million pax. So there's quite a big difference on many different continents. And then at the end, just before we go to the Q&A, I will show you where even the best laid plans can go wrong. Okay, so working a real life example of some direct experiences we've all had. Okay, so this slide will be up for a short while. So it builds on a slide from Jack's presentation, but we'll just try and look at it from a slightly different perspective. So on the left hand here, as in the previous session, we've got revenues, and Carl and others have already picked up on, you've absolutely got to understand, you know, what you're trying to achieve as the airport. What's the development strategy for that airport? You know, what's its aim in terms of passenger numbers? What's its potential in terms of passenger numbers? Jack picked up on the market, you know, driven approach, and it's very much our approach. It's a market-driven approach. What's the potential? So we look at the revenues. We do all of this before we make the deal and put the offer together. And then hopefully when we've won the offer and we are the operator, life doesn't stop, as Colin was alluding to. This is a constant activity. And route development was picked up by DAA as one of the really big drivers. We think it is as well. And our approach to this is slightly different. We do have some route development at a couple of our larger airports dedicated to that airport. But what we tend to operate is a back office or shared service type model where we have a route development team which is dedicated to serving all of our airports. And you'll realise there are lots of sort of interrelationships between the different airports and the different operators, different airlines, and in some cases the holiday companies, the charter companies. And we're able, from using that back office support, to create a much bigger network of potential operators to the airports and come up with some more interesting deals across the airport network and build on that. So, but absolutely, I agree with Carl. The key is the route development and using that knowledge and background and sharing it across the airports to drive up not only passenger numbers, but cargo was mentioned as well. Lee just mentioned cargo. Some of our airports, cargo is also very, very key, and driving up the cargo volumes is as critical. Optimizing the revenue, well, this has been pretty much discussed. Like other airport operators, we have a data center where we analyze the operation of each of the airports. And we run the numbers, we have external data, internal data, and we're constantly assessing the performance of the airport, where we need to push forward investment, where we need to come back in terms of investment and delay some investment. And it's a real focus, and again, as Carl mentioned, it's data driven. You know, we don't just sit there and think, oh, what if, or this doesn't, wonder why this is not going so well. We have a lot of data to support this sort of evidence-based approach. And equally, the customer experience, and I put it in the revenue box there, actually, because it makes, and it's a different perspective to what was presented before, but it actually is a key driver to the attractiveness of the airport. And like other operators, we invest a reasonable amount of money in improving that customer experience. Now, it might be in hard type infrastructure, maybe in the terminal itself. It could just be in people and training and the processes, and then the recognition through the awards, etc. But it's a key driver for us as well. In terms of the other side of the chart, if we consider that, the investment, we never take anything really at face value. So we've got some skin in the game here. Maybe it's 20% of the equity that's gone in. Okay, so that's money that's come about out of the available pot for investment that our group has, and we compete internally within the group for our road operation. So we have road operations around the world that are also cash hungry, and they want that money to buy into some more road concessions. So we have our internal challenges to secure that. So we have to make sure it's the money that's in is well spent and is balanced correctly and generates the returns that we're expecting and achieves the objectives that the concessionaire sets out to achieve. So we never take anything at face value. As I said before, we've got a back office that looks at a lot of data, and we can analyse when the optimum time for an investment might be. So before the session, we work out a big plan, when we're going to do this, when we're going to do this, the likely, and then we build a price around that. But that's the plan, and the plan can change, and we can adapt it to meet the needs of everybody at the airport, including the investor. Squeezing, what we've seen in more recent years is the use of technology, and I think it was the very first presentation today that discussed it, enables you to squeeze some more capacity actually out of existing infrastructure. And when you go into these deals, they're 20, 25, 30 years long. 25 years ago, I didn't know I'd be married for 25 years, and I didn't know that I'd be standing here talking to you. I didn't really know how my career or my life was going to go. But I had some plans, okay, they weren't exactly as it turned out actually, and it's the same as when you're operating in airports. Concession, you have those plans, quite early stage. The plans are routinely reviewed, of course, but actually you need to be more dynamic than that and take account of the environment you're in. I'll show you a slide in a minute where the environment was quite challenging, and we made the right decision based on data, or we thought were the right decisions, and still things went wrong, but it's a good example. Operational expenditure is the same, so CapEx we're very data-driven about, OpEx the same. Somebody asked a question in a couple of sessions ago about, you've already got staff at the airport that you take over, what happens? Well, of course, those staff are generally employed by the new private company, and all the experience and benefits from doing that are critical for us. But the way we operate, the way we manage the airport, the organisational arrangements, the functional arrangements, all of those are reviewed and refined using the experience we have of operating other airports, the experience other people have of operating airports. We're not the only people in the game, and we try and bring all that best practice together. This use of shared services we find particularly useful. Like DAA, it enables us to train the local workforce. We can bring some people up to Paris, where our shared services team is, to provide training for them there. But it's a very efficient way of providing a service that may not be required 100% of the time for that particular entity. So we support marketing, route development, even IT, web design, all those sorts of types of activities that may not, for a smaller airport, require 100% resource, can be supported by that back office or shared service type function. And another area where we've, again, it relates to the technology session right at the beginning, it's starting to develop which actually helps with our social charter. As a group, we have a French owned, we have a social charter to be good to everyone and the environment. So it helps with that. We're also starting to look at the sort of the green type projects, this decarbonisation, other activities which are going to actually, it requires some investment, but reduces the operating costs for us. We've created some wind farms, some solar farms, etc., things like that at some of the airports. And probably don't need to touch on the last part. So we look at each airport individually. We look at every deal individually. We structure the deal with partners. We usually go in with partners. We normally go in with an investor, such as Lee. If we've got to do a lot of construction work, we would go in with a contractor. If there's less construction work and they just require design and engineering services, well, we can cover that. That's our core business. So every deal is different, is structured differently. The amount of investment we make is different. But we then manage and monitor the contracts we go on and optimise it and squeeze as much as we can out of it for everybody over that 20, 25 or 30 year period. However, it doesn't always go to plan. Is anyone from Côte d'Ivoire here? Ivory Coast? No? Okay. I'm not going to say anything bad about them. Okay, but this was the story. Okay, so so we're about 1 million pax. It's not a huge airport, but it's very important for the region. And so we took our first concession there in about 1996. Okay, all was good. We did. You can see that everything was going beautifully as we prepared for concession. We had some good confidence in the numbers. Our data team didn't exist really. We didn't have as much data or sophistication in how we look at that data as we do today. But we were confident. So, what happened next? Things started to go pretty well. And then, who could have predicted that? The data's never going to tell you that in 1999 there's going to be a coup. Okay, so when a country is subject to a coup, the operating norm tends to change. People don't tend to fly, they fly out. They don't tend to fly in. There's a lot of confusion. And it has quite a negative impact on your passenger numbers, as you can see here. So despite all the best planning, everything looked rosy, didn't it? We carried on that upward trend. Everything was going to plan. We were investing as we said we were going to invest. We were getting returns. Concessionaire was getting the returns. Everything was good. Then things went south slightly. Okay, then 9/11. Okay, so we definitely couldn't have predicted that. It affected everybody. We continue to head south. We just think we're going to bottom out, okay, and then a key customer goes bankrupt. Okay, so we're now in 2002. We recover from that and we begin to get a sort of steady state again. Okay, so again, we're recrunching the numbers, it's looking okay. We renew the concession. Okay, all good. So we've got some confidence, we've learned a lot over the last 10 or so years. We've renewed the concession and we go forward. Oh, what happened there? Elections. Okay, it was almost equivalent to the coup. The country was thrown into crisis for almost 2 years. There was fighting on the streets, real issues over the future of the country. So we've been steady state. We were confident again, and bam, who could predict? Now, our numbers and our estimates and our planning always quite conservative. We operate other airports in this part of Africa. And so we know there are some uncertainties and things, so we do try and factor it in, but you can't factor everything. So the election happened, then fortunately things settled down and the economy recovered, and we're sort of getting back to where we wanted to be way back here. Look what happened in 1990. We're about the same place we were in 1990. A few disasters in between, and that is that. Okay, that's me.
Thank you. Q&A? Yes, we still have time. Yes.
Thank you, gentlemen. I just wanted to ask a general question. Gatwick achieved 20 times EBITDA. London City achieved 27 times EBITDA. But more typically, Istanbul, Vienna, and other airports used to be lower double digits, 10%, 12, 15%. My first question is, how do you see those extraordinary values pertaining in the Middle East, the privatization program? And secondly, there's been a kind of a backlash to PPPs, water, rail. Do you see the trend maintaining towards PPP in the aviation sector?
Maybe I'll have a go at the question. Yeah. Maybe you have a go at the question too. No, I mean those multiples are extraordinary, to be honest with you. I mean, they don't really have any direct comparison. But I think it shows that for those particular assets, the hardcore nucleus of their client base is pretty sticky. And they've got, although they do compete in an environment, with near neighbours, with other airports, But this is a very mature market. The opportunity, I think, to draw revenues from land, from non-aeronautical sources, I think is obviously very attractive for investors. And the other thing to make a point is, at a particular point in time, there's either a surplus of capital or a shortage of capital. I think the investors that were looking at those assets had a surplus of capital, and they felt that there was a competitive pressure to invest. Because the large infrastructure funds, of which I'm not, but I have worked within, you know, if they have collated money to set up a fund, they've got to deploy it. And they can only earn money if they've got it deployed. So yes, I think that drives up valuations. But the model here in the Middle East is very different. And I'll let Alan talk about sort of the vagaries of the PPP challenges, I think, for the Middle East. But I think it's fair to say that PPP is still in its infancy in this part of the world. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have a role. Absolutely, it does have a role. And as we've seen, we have a varied spectrum. And I don't necessarily see full privatisation. I think the state ownership of these assets is too precious. But there is a role neatly in the middle. And Queen Alia is a great example of a very, very successful airport where the government of Jordan, I think, got that balance just about right. They were able to, you know, with partners, make sure that they've got a really good operating asset that invested their capital expenditure on their behalf. But that wouldn't be applicable for Dubai, for example. It may not be applicable for an airport such as Jeddah, because it's so big, it's so huge. You know, there isn't a private sector investor pool that would necessarily be able to see value in that in itself. And that doesn't mean there aren't elements of it. There can't be concession or management contracts, and of which all of those will be going through various contracting mechanisms.
Just building on that, I think it is quite immature at the moment. We're beginning to see, for example, in Saudi Arabia, the relaunching of the process there. And there are some airports that won't stand it on their own. So this concept of bundling airports, we see it in other parts of the world, in South America especially. The concept of bundling the airports and getting the airport bundled right is really critical. In fact, internally we've been doing some research recently on what makes the optimum bundle. Okay, so one of our competitors is Vinci, who just bought 50.1% of Gatwick for about $3 billion. Okay, so even if I go to the group chairman, he's not going to be the best deal ever. He's not going to give me $3 billion. So my challenge to my team was, we haven't got $3 billion to invest of our own money into. We get to see that he's probably got $3 billion. But as an operator, we haven't got that level. So if let's look at the sort of combinations of different size airports and the geography and the different nature of the operations. And I think it's particularly important in Saudi Arabia as that new process of awarding concessions or whatever it will be restarts, and I can see it happening elsewhere in the Middle East as well. We're like others, probably starting to plan on what good looks like and what we think we could do that is good for Saudi Arabia in this case, and for us, of course, but also it would apply elsewhere in the region as well. It's surprisingly immature at the moment, but I think it's going to change quite quickly. There are different drivers.
All right, next please.
While she moves that, Jack just reminded me actually that the really good news story is that Aviation, the one I just showed you, the disaster is now 2 million pax today and is operating 380 in and out of there. Who would have thought that back in '96?
Yeah, okay. I realized that in all your presentations, for instance, you are an investor. You look at the revenues, you also look at the cost involved, including the CapEx and all the other expenditure that you put in, at an airport. But if you look at the customer experience, you really don't talk about safety and security. So how do you address the impact of safety and security going in such a scheme?
Yeah, let me
You start.
because I think this is probably a question for the operator more than the investor, so I'll keep it brief. Of course, you know, as and when you receive an opportunity to invest in an airport, there will be a whole series of requirements. Technical requirements, operational requirements, capex requirements. So we're not excluding those, absolutely. They're already pretty well set. The advisors that have supported the government agency in pulling that together will have all of these things absolutely top of their agenda. For us, it's critical to ensure that we get an operator that's partnering with us that absolutely has those top of the agenda. The only thing I would make about, the point I'd make about capex is that governments have a tendency to have very grand designs on airport infrastructure. And as investors, I think we've heard once or twice this morning, we have to right-size that project. So absolutely customer service is important, you know, public satisfaction, ASQ scores, however you want to measure that. But you've got to let the airport grow. You've got to start with something that's manageable, that isn't going to be too burdensome to run operatingly, but then you can grow as the traffic needs it to grow. Rather than starting with a mega airport and then watching it sit there empty for years. So it's getting that balance right.
I don't think I've got anything to add. I mean, all of those points that you make are equally valid, and they're all balanced out. I mean, safety and security are particularly critical. Security is quite a wide meaning today. You know, from everything from national security through to airport security through to cyber security. So all of those things we factor in, and it affects our risk score of that particular opportunity, and ultimately what we're willing to pay and what returns we can offer based on that level of risk. You know, there are some places that the group would not allow me to invest and operate because of the risk score. So, but it discussed earlier, you know, we all have, you know, investment committees, risk committees. You know, there's a really rigid process to go through. But ultimately, we want to be able to meet those requirements that you've set. It just, you know, how we approach it may be different, and it might cost a bit more because of some of those issues. But they're all addressed, and they're all addressed equally and considered as part of the process.
In the case of Côte d'Ivoire, did you get MIGA involved or some sort of political risk insurance? And how do you see adding political risk insurance as part of the consortium to make sure PPPs fly?
It's not something I've been directly involved in, actually.
You can't buy it. In reality, when you're looking at an opportunity, there's certain risks that clearly I should manage. The financing risk, the operating risk, the day-to-day construction risk, you know, bringing the project to life. Unfortunately, there are external factors, and I think your example was excellent in saying that we don't live in a perfect world. There are extraneous events, force majeure, what you call it, but there are things that we have to be prepared to live with. Yes, okay, you can spend a lot of money on insurances, should you wish, but ultimately you've got to be able to, you know, pull your belt in and be prepared for the ride.
And that's where the partnership or marriage, as people refer to it this morning, is absolutely critical. So getting that right at the beginning and really managing expectations and doing some scenario planning and thinking about what you might ask each other to do. The round table thing is a very good concept. Is critical, because when a coup happens, you're right, okay, what's the immediate effect? Operationally, what we're going to do, you get everything sorted out. Oh, what's this going to mean to that agreement we made 6 years ago? But you have that relationship and you're able to have that discussion, and you're not prepared for that actual event, you're prepared to deal with events.
Just to say 2 words about Côte d'Ivoire. So, first of all, with all of these, I'm proud to say that we never lost money in our investment, because we were very well trying to get proper management and always getting the right balance between OPEX and CAPEX. Investments were done on time, expenditures were done on time, and the traffic developed as expected because of the issues. However, once we were in a position to renegotiate with the government the 2010 extension, we took some more buffers into consideration in our business plan in case something else happened. Now we are on the upside of this, of our assessments. And of course, the airport is growing at a 2-digit growth, and we have a daily A380 flight coming every day from Paris, for example. Air Cote d'Ivoire has been established now, and it's growing quite well. So the situation is more on the bright side now, but we spent from 1996, I would say, until 2010 with an unclear situation. However, we were managed to manage the risks and the different situations that we were facing.
Very quickly, to reach some financial close, I've had to include MIGA and PRI, political risk insurance, and actually by including political risk insurance, we've been able to reach financial close in countries like Angola, countries like Congo. Otherwise, obviously, the financial cost increases dramatically, but this allows for projects to be closed, and basically this allows for one of the questions that was raised before, what is the cost of not having a infrastructure to serve the public? And this not having the cost of the infrastructure is also very important.
Yes.
I have last.
You were looking very hungry.
I'll make it short. My name is Abiola Lawal. I am an operator from Nigeria. We've heard about your Aviation experience. I have a sense that you really can't talk about Africa and the size of air travel without at least having Nigeria in that mix. I haven't heard anything about examples, whether you have any experience within that particular country, or you have any interest, because Nigeria, the data is showing us very clearly that is a very early opportunities to be able to invest in airports. I'm currently involved in a structure right now for regional airports, where it took 5 years, or maybe 10 years, I would say, the state government that built the regional airport that finally come to realization that they don't have the expertise to run these things. So the interest is showing up now that come and take it off my hand as PPPs. But we also realize that there's not a lot of deep expertise in the region. So very similar to like in Saudi Arabia, where oil is a major driver of the economy. Nigeria is in that space. So I'm curious to know what's the interest in partnership to be able to not just evaluate, but also take advantage of such opportunities. Thank you.
As an operator, we have several airports in Africa. We see it as a huge market for us, and have teams there and experience of operating there. So we see the challenges, but we absolutely see the opportunities. You saw, the great presentation earlier, the PIN code for the next sort of 100 years or whatever it was. Africa is growing like mad, but the ground-based infrastructure is not what it might be, and some of the distances are huge. We absolutely see aviation in Africa as huge, and that's why we have offices there. We have a long trading history. Our oldest contracts, 60 odd years ago, are from not in aviation, but are from Africa. So absolutely, and I think like other operators and investors, it's certain investors are attracted, or operators are attracted to certain markets, and that is a particular market that we're attracted to. Absolutely.
Well, let me be clear. I'm a Middle East Saudi-based investor. Nigeria, unfortunately, is not in my mandate. But let me make a very quick and very generalistic comment. Opportunities in economies that are so growing as fast as Nigeria, in a continent that's growing so fast as Africa, of course will be of interest. And there's some great agencies out there, such as the World Bank, such as the ERBD, that actually are in the best position to bring your government and the opportunity together in terms of the way they structure it. And the only point I'd make is, and I see a few representatives here from government agencies, I say, look, consult with investors. Get the investors in a room. They're happy to come and talk to you and say, look, this is how we might be structuring it. What's your feedback? What do you think the market will bear at this particular point in time? Who do you think the partners are that we should? So use your advisor, but also use the market and find out what the best model might be for your particular project. Because as I showed earlier on, that lead time is long. And it costs me a lot of money as an investor sitting building up a bid case. And I want to know that I've got a fair chance of success.
And it's quite a small world. The operators, the investors, those people who are involved in airport concessions know each other. We compete with each other, we partner with each other sometimes. So it's all very well known. Getting people in the room early and sharing that experience, you'll find people who are just happy to say, well, look, this is not something that we as a company are interested in, but there's this investor or this operator who's more aligned to that type of opportunity. We're lucky. We work in the most beautiful industry in the world, aviation. And we do it because we love it and we've got a passion for it. And I think we all want to see everyone succeed. So talking early helps.
Okay, that's it. Thank you, Mr. Ali, Mr. Alan.